Don't worry, just started. Okay, we'll commence the board meeting then. Just before I do, I'll just do a few welcome and apologies. Before I do the apologies, just welcome some observers here this morning. We've got Dan West, who's here to observe the board from a nursing perspective. We've got Helen Cord, who's here watching us from a finance. Oh, sorry, did I not say Concord? Sorry. And we've got Becky Hogan as well, who's observing us from the well-led exercise. We've also got our external advisor to the board this morning, Sakthi. Sakthi, do you just want to quickly introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, all. I'm Sakthi Karunanidhi. I'm also the Director of Public Health in Lancashire County Council. I've just taken on this role to be one of the advisors. And thank you, Mike and Aaron and colleagues, for a warm welcome.
Welcome to the board. Welcome, sir. Paul, if I ask you to just give us the apologies, please.
Apologies from Scott, and Leanne is here on Scott.
Okay. Let's just check through the company secretary. Any declarations of interest made?
Nothing has been raised that needs to be escalated to the board today, Mike.
Okay, thank you. We have got other guests coming to the board on various agenda items, so I'll introduce them when we go into the relevant items. So should we go through the minutes of the board then? Minutes of the Board of Directors on the 26th of October. Do you want to approve those minutes? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, and I'll look to the company secretary again. Anything on the action sheets to bring to our attention?
Thanks, Mike. The action sheet has been reviewed and updated for the last Board of Directors meetings. There's nothing to escalate. There are a couple of items which are highlighted, but nothing that requires any attention today.
Brilliant. Thank you. Then we'll move on to item 156, and I'll ask our Chief Nursing Officer to introduce this item. This is the patient story.
Many thanks, Chair. So we're going to hear today from William, who's used our services related to musculoskeletal conditions. I think it's a really important story in terms of seeing what we do well, but also how we want to learn. So I'm going to hand over to Barry and the team, if that's okay.
Thank you, Bridget. Good morning. Hello, my name's Barry Rigg. I'm Head of Patient Experience here at the Morecambe Bay NHS Trust. Just bear with me 1 minute. I've forgotten the magic button. Include sound. So joining me today is Jennifer Druitt. Jennifer's our clinical team leader for MSK, and also joining me this morning is Annette Shepherd. Annette Shepherd is our patient experience facilitator. So today we will hear from Mr. Stewart, who will outline his experience of the Carnforth MSK service. A written account of Mr. Stewart's experience can be found within pages 3 to 5 of the board reference pack. Although this item is a reflection on the Carnforth MSK service, wider applicability could be applied with regards to the equality impact assessment, for example, for our new hospitals programme and our trust clinical strategy. So drawing out the points for the equality impact assessment from this story. So citizens, particularly with this story, expect services closer to their own home. Within this story, citizens talk about poor patient transport and transport access around South Cumbria. And the patient, particularly here, Mr. Stewart, will talk around the increased demands on hospital transport when we make decisions to move community clinics around our patch. And also for the equality impact assessment, one of the negative impacts of moving the clinic from Carnforth to Westmoreland, which is what we did here, is the car park arrangements and the distance that patients are expected to walk from the car park into the hospital building, particularly making reference to the MSK service. So on behalf of Mr. Stewart, who unfortunately can't be here today, I've got a short narrative and I've also got a voice recording to share. So Mr. Stewart lives in Carnforth, and following a fall in May 2020, he experienced a shoulder problem. Mr. Stewart received some physio support before being referred to the trauma and orthopaedic consultant in March 2021. The consultant agreed that surgery was appropriate, and Mr. Stewart was placed on the trauma and orthopaedic waiting list in June 2021. The operation was carried out successfully in September 2021, and a follow-up appointment was made and kept in October 2021. So Mr. Stewart regularly attended the MSK clinic in Carnforth. However, due to space availability in Carnforth and to help with COVID environmental adjustments, the MSK service was moved temporarily from Carnforth to the Westmoreland General Hospital, Level 1, Ward 2. The transfer of the MSK clinic from Carnforth to the Westmoreland General Hospital has and continues to cause considerable inconvenience in both terms of travel time and expense for both Mr. Stewart and many other patients. Mr. Stewart said that the MSK staff continue to be excellent. However, he would like to share today his comments and experiences.
Okay, good morning. My name is Buddy Rigg. I'm the Head of Patient Experience here at the Morecambe Bay NHS Trust. And with me today is Mr. Stewart, also known as William. William, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've travelled from today, mindful that we're here at Westmoreland General this morning.
I've actually travelled from Carnforth, live fairly close to where the physio centre used to be. And I was able to drive today, but in the past, after my operation, obviously I wasn't able to drive, so we had to find some other way of getting here. We tried patient transport. That was not at all successful, having to wait about 45 minutes before they even answered the phone. And then you go through the third degree to say why you need patient transport. They did eventually agree, but the transport didn't turn up for that appointment. So the end result of that was the appointment had to be cancelled. They did send another car, but of course it was too late for the appointment. The other alternative would be by bus, but that involves two changes. You have to come into Kendal Centre, then back out. It takes an hour and a half each way because it goes into every single little village, and of course the bus jolts you rather a lot, so I did not fancy that one little bit. So the only other alternative was a taxi. So we ended up having to get taxis to come to the sessions, and that was at a cost of £70 each time. Which is all very well. NHS is free at the point of delivery, but obviously very expensive sometimes to get here.
Thank you. So we will play this story at the Trust Board, but also at certain staff groups as well. It probably is just worth noting that you used to go to the Carnforth clinic for your MSK appointments. And the Carnforth clinic appointments recently, during the COVID pandemic, moved to Westmoreland General Hospital.
That's correct, yes.
So the experience and the cost that you've articulated there is because of your appointments being moved from
Carnforth to Kendal.
To Kendal.
Yeah.
And you're here today for an appointment as well. So
absolutely,
tell me about how's that for you? How many more appointments will you have with us, or do you not know?
Well, we've got another one coming up. Oh, sorry, I've got another one coming up in December. Hopefully, after that, as long as I continue with the exercises, I may not need to return again, which would be very nice.
So, how would you describe the service here at Kendal to a friend or family? Is the service, is it the same in terms of staffing? Is the staffing still the same staff and friendly face? How would you describe the service that you've received today?
Well, coincidentally, I'm actually seeing the same physiotherapist. So, I mean, the service that she provides is the same as it was when we were at Carnforth. And I mean, I'm very satisfied with, generally, I'm very satisfied with the work that the unit does. It's just the travelling that was, as you say, it was because of COVID that they had to move out. And of course, by the time I had my operation, it wasn't able to move back.
Okay. So maybe thinking about what message would you like to share with the Trust Board? I'm mindful that you can't be with us on the 30th of November. You are on holiday. But what message, if you were with us on the day, what message would you like to share with the Board of Directors?
Well, basically, I'm not the only one, even from the block that we live in. There are at least 4 other people who are having to have physio and having to travel to Kendal, various different means. But the mere fact that the unit here only deals with people from the Carnforth area and they're fully occupied would suggest that there is the need for the service to be much nearer to where it is required, which is basically at Carnforth.
Thank you very much. So we do have plans here in the Trust to review the service and do our best to return the MSK service back to Carnforth. Would you like to be involved and included in that work in some way?
Well, I'm not quite sure what good my involvement would be, to be honest.
Okay. Would you be happy to maybe keep sharing your experiences with us and the impacts that it is having on you having to travel to Kendal for your clinics?
If I have to continue, I mean, I say at the moment I've got one other appointment, and hopefully that will actually be the last one. So my sort of travelling experience will hopefully end then in December. So.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to share your story. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? No.
Okay, so that's Mr. Stewart's story. Just before I do hand you over to Jennifer, our clinical team leader for MSK, you will note in page 5 of your reference pack, there are a number of patient comments provided of very similar comments, and we've collected those through the friends and family test. So therefore, together, the patient experience team and the community care group have been working together to develop a plan to return the clinic to Carnforth. I will now hand you over to Jennifer, our clinical team leader for MSK, who will provide a clinician reflection. Jennifer will also take you through some of the actions which are complete and some of the actions which are still ongoing. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Barry. I'm so sorry, I'm having IT issues, so I've joined on my mobile device, so I can't turn my camera on. But thank you very much. And yes, I'm Jennifer Dewar, the clinical team leader for the MSK Carnforth team. And I would like to just share some reflections and actions from Mr. Stewart's patient story. So we've been working with the volunteers and the patient experience team at Westmorland General, and we've updated and added further signage to help our patients find their way to our clinic on level 1. We've also been using the feedback from patients, our NWAS colleagues, the transport volunteers, and we've updated our MSK service delivery equality impact assessment document. Pauline Preston has been working with community care group colleagues, and our Patient Voices has prepared an options appraisal paper for the Trust Investment Prioritisation Group, and we are awaiting feedback from this group before we prepare our full business case to support the return of our MSK clinic to Carnforth. I hope you agree that by working closely with our patients, we can bring their ideas and feedback to the decision makers and continue to provide our quality service, which we are incredibly proud of, closer to our patient population in Carnforth again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So I now hand you back over to Bridget. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think there's a number of things around this story that are really important. So a lot of the questions we've been asked in board and in our subcommittees is, how do we know what we do with our patient experience? So I think this story is really important. So when you read further on in the IPR that we are genuinely using the patient experience that we have in terms of informing decision making and including people that use our service. So it's a really good practical example about what do we do with that and what does it mean and how do we start corroborating the information that we have. So I was really pleased that it's a good practical example of how we're progressing in that area. So I think I just wanted to comment on that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bridget. Barry, thank you as always, and to yourself, Jennifer. I know there's technical problems, but we heard you perfectly well, so thank you for that. I'm opening the room up. Adrian?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Barry, for bringing this this experience to be able to share with us as a board. And it's brilliant to hear that there is a feedback loop, and that does influence and inform the type of provision that we make available to support our communities, the location, and there's a real emphasis, I hear that, around quality. So that's absolutely fantastic. I just wondered if you could just give me an insight into the impact on the finances in terms of being able to provide this, and how replicable this approach may be if we were going to commit to provide local services within our rural communities at scale. So I know that's a bit of an open-ended question, but just how that featured as part of this decision-making process, because this is an important part of our understanding if we're going to make future commitments like this as a board. Thank you.
Just before you respond, Barry, I'll just check with Bridget who's the most appropriate person to respond.
So what I'm just thinking, I'm quite happy for the team's comment principle, but I think given the fact it's probably something that we will probably bring back to the board, or certainly through our processes, again, if that's helpful. So I don't mind the comment, but I think it's just about understanding the context of it, about whether it's something that the team can answer now, or whether that at scale question which you're asking is probably something a bit broader.
I just wondered if it was part of the process, you know, to actually determine how we were meant to make this.
I'll ask the chief exec as well.
Thank you.
So yes, it absolutely is. I think what we're dealing with now is, so the imperative for change in some of the models that we've had to put in place was driven by COVID and some of the IP guidance and access issues that we're facing at the time. One of the areas that I know Chris will highlight when we talk about the financial updates and as the board considers its financial strategy is, how do we get the balance right now on going back where it's the right thing to do for pre-COVID delivery against the scale of challenge that we've got on operational performance and financial performance. So whenever we make business cases or changes to a service, a number of factors are considered. So impact on patients, and it sounds like when we made the change, we probably could and should have done better about that at the time. And there's a reflection there for us in how we take service developments forward in the future, which is good to hear Jennifer's reflections. We then consider the impact on quality and safety outcomes, normally with a quality impact assessment when we do service change. And then financials do absolutely consider. So if there's a financial cost, we have a really robust business case development process that checks and challenges against each service change that we put in place. Now, more broadly, we're going to face, I think, when we have the clinical strategy presented in December, January, through the decision making, how do we get the balance then between care closer to home, workforce and financial challenges, and making sure that we listen to what our patients and communities need in the future. So the board, through the rest of this quarter and next quarter, is going to have some decisions to make about how we balance the risks, because what's very clear is it's very rare when you get a proposal that allows all of those things to be answered positively. So when we get into the debates at board, I think on service change, particularly the clinical strategy, I think we'll come back to that line of question.
Thank you, and I do look forward to that, because there's a lot of balance, as you say, that we've got to determine as a board, and we've got to have effective communications with our communities on the back of that. And I think that's something that we need to explore a little bit more.
Just to follow up Adrian's question, when will it come to the board?
So I think what I will do is advise next quarter more broadly. I'll need to work with finance colleagues just to understand what work's already been completed and what needs to be done, and then more broadly touching on what the chief executive said is just where that fits into the clinical strategy as well. So if it's okay, I will come back next month or in between board and next month with a date for part of our actions.
Okay, thank you. Conscious of the time, colleagues, we've got 3 other questions, so I'll go Phil, then Liz, then yourself, Karen. Phil.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, just a few things, Mike. I wanted to say thanks to Barry and his team for looking at the data, and also to William. It's really powerful. I'm mindful I'm in a public board meeting, but I've got to say, Mike, being honest, that was hugely difficult and embarrassing to listen to. I think it was completely avoidable. And I'm mindful of COVID, you know, and I'm assuming there was immediate safety issue, which meant we didn't require public consultation. However, William's insight shows that could have been avoided. And equality impacts aside, you know, my experience of them is they tend to be completed by people without the same medical condition or disability. They tend to own a car and have a job and be white. And that tends to be the generalisation of people who complete equality impact assessments. They don't walk a mile in people's shoes. Now, I'd request really that, you know, when we're doing this, whether it's through an emergency or not, that the patients are actually doing the equality impact assessment. They're saying how this feels. And an offer, Mike, I'd like to pay William's taxi costs myself out my own pocket if the trust hasn't already done so. I really don't think I could look this man in the face if I saw him, knowing that he's had to fork that out for something which which could have been avoided.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Mike.
Note those comments, particularly the bit about the quality assessment and involving our patients in that exercise. So thank you for that insight. Okay, I'll move on to Liz Sedgley.
Thanks, Mike. And Phil actually touched on a lot of the points I was going to make about we do need to sit back and think about the patients and their locations and their access to affordable travel or travel at any, you know, cost at all, if it's available for them when we move services around or when we're evaluating existing services. Because I think particularly going into the winter we're in now, with all the, you know, inflation, the cost of fuel, the cost of travel and such like, we're going to find that it's really going to impact more and more on the perhaps the older, more vulnerable, and also the poorer members of our society. It's very easy for the likes of me to jump in my car and travel to wherever to get to an appointment, but lots of people, it's going to be a choice, isn't it, whether they attend or whether they don't attend. So I think we're going to notice an increase in DNAs down to the fact that people can't afford to travel to various appointments, so they'll pick and choose where they go. And also it's going to exacerbate our existing health inequalities. So this work is going to become more and more important to us to think about how we deliver services and, more importantly, where we deliver them. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Again, similar points. Karen?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks particularly to William and Barry for a really compelling story. I think related to the wider piece of work that Bridget has spoken to, can we factor into that the risk implications of people's lifestyle and social factors, as well as the clinical risk factors? That just seems critical. It was positive that William was able to afford the £70 follow-up, but had he not had the follow-up to his to surgery, what would the implications of that have been, both for him personally and also for the inefficiency that builds in to the way that service was being delivered? So as well as the financial factors for the trust, can we also factor in those other risk factors for our individuals and communities, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. There's some interesting comments made and we've noted them all. They'll go in the minutes. What I'm trying to do now is bring them all together into the board's action points, specifically what executive colleagues can go and leave the meeting with and come back to us with, so we can get some assurance, but also some follow-up to the action points. Chief Exec.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's reasonable that the lines of questioning and reflections we've had back will feature in two key pieces of work that are on the board forward plan. So the clinical strategy, we've talked about getting that to the board in January, and things like quality impact assessments and how we do them, the financial impact and how we address that balance of access, outcomes and making sure that we don't promote further health inequalities will feature in that clinical strategy document. The second is a piece of work that I know Phil will be leading on around engagement and our approach to it. That's for both colleague working with the Chief People Officer and patients working with the Chief Nurse around our approach to engagement, co-design, co-production, patients and community voices in our services. So without picking up separate actions on each kind of question posed, I think those two key programmes of work will ensure as executives we capture those themes in those pieces.
Okay, Bridget, yeah, you okay with that? Okay. I'm going to move on, colleagues, but I'll just end with, I think, really what we're dealing with as a board is an issue of fairness and equity. I think what I'll leave the meeting with is what William, I'll quote from William. He said, "I know the NHS is free at the point of delivery, pause, but it can take a lot to get there." And I think that's something that is coming from this story about fairness and equity, really. So we will take those points on board, and we'll follow this up. Barry, as always, thank you. You bring us really, really good insights into the real life of patients and their experiences. I'm always grateful to you for that. Jennifer, thank you for getting through with the technology. Grateful for your comments and some insight into what the team's doing. Barry, will you write to William, please, and work with the company secretary just to give him a formal letter from the board to say that, you know, his insight has influenced some of our decision making, and although he may not see it, there will be changes based on some of the stories and implications of those that he gave to us this morning. So
yeah, will do. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, thank you for those. I'm going to move on to item 157, Chair's report. As I do every month, you had the paper. It outlines the meetings that I've had. It would be remiss of me not to say, as I do every month, thank you to all our colleagues. We know we're coming up now to the really, really busy period, though I would say we don't have a period that isn't really busy anymore. But I'm going to say that we're heading into the winter upsurge now, so just to thank all colleagues for everything that they do, and hopefully we'll get through Christmas. But any questions on my paper? No, thank you very much. Then we'll note the Chair's report, and we'll move on now to item 158, Chief Executive report. Over to you, Larry.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be brief and keep to the same structure that I generally use for my report, talking anything that I've been involved in or fed back from the national, regional level, and then a quick update on key priorities for the Trust. There's a few items in my report in particular that we'll pick up in specific discussions on the agenda later on, Chair, so I won't go through all of it. Just in terms of the national update, I think the biggest kind of item to bring to the board's attention was the autumn budget statement on the 17th of November. I know a number of us were waiting with bated breath to see what the offer might be for health and social care, given the economic climate we're in. I think it's fair to say that there's mixed views of kind of the financial announcements that were made. To be clear, it's an extra £3.3 billion for the NHS over the next 2 years. Now, just to be clear, Chris will be leading a conversation around finance, strategic financial improvements in our financial strategy. Whilst the headline of that is a significant sum of money, it does not cover off the current forecast of inflation. And we are still facing significant financial challenges in our underlying run rate and cost pressures with non-recurrent CIPs. So again, be prepared for the next 2 years to have a real focus on that balance, Adrian, of quality, safety improvements and financial delivery. So yeah, it was very good to see that continued further investment, but it still remains that we'll have a financial challenge position into next year and beyond. Interesting to see at the same time an announcement of also significant investment in social care, around 2.8 billion next year and 4.7 billion the year after, with a particular focus. There's a sum of money ring fenced for supporting discharges to community. Really interesting to see with Partners in the Bay, once that gets a bit clearer, how it might help us with that perennial kind of pressure we have around not meeting criteria to reside in discharges out into the community. So that was welcomed, but we do need to see the detail and understand how that's going to have a practical impact into next year. The other two issues to highlight nationally, there's been a dialogue here at this board and also regionally nationally for a number of years actually on the need for a future workforce plan for health and social care, and an announcement made by the DHSC and the Secretary of State that there will be a workforce plan next year produced that looks at 5, 10 and 15-year time horizons. Really very welcomed, and again we will want to play our full part in contributing to that and understanding what we might need, particularly on the back of our clinical strategy as it's developed over the course of the next few months. And one last parish notice nationally, just to recognise that as ICBs and ICSs have been set up in the summer, Patricia Hewitt, a chair of a ICB down in the south, has been commissioned to produce a review of ICB kind of governance, accountability and autonomy, just to make sure, I think, that as we set up the operating models for the new systems, we're taking best advantage of the change in legislation to allow those programme work to be delivered. So look forward to the report that Patricia will produce next year. Regionally, most of our focus has been in two areas really. One is around working with colleagues at NHS England around our recovery support programme progress, our monthly system improvement board, and progressing towards satisfying ourselves first and then colleagues in the region and nationally that we've achieved or on plan to achieve our soft 4 exit criteria. I will make the point, I make it at every board, make it at every meeting, whilst that is a gateway decision for us to have considered and agreed, it is purely a moment in time as we progress towards soft 3, soft 2 and our continuous improvement journey. Notwithstanding that, that's a programme of work we're doing with the region. Chris has initiated a gateway review process that we're now working with regional colleagues on in anticipation of a governance check and challenge review later in the quarter. We're also spending a lot of time with our ICS and regional colleagues on preparations for winter. So the board will be aware and has presented a number of times the seasonal winter plan, urgent care improvement plan, plus the additional investments of capacity and flow, plus some of the work we're doing around what I would call business as usual tenacity on delivery from our teams. But we have a new structure being set up through winter with strategic control centres being managed by regions and ICSs. They will come into effect from tomorrow. We're set up to contribute to that. Our ICS has been a bit more on the front foot because the way we managed through COVID with the joint cellular approach, actually largely the infrastructure for that is in place. We've just had to work through things like 24/7 senior clinician input where required, and that's now been resolved. So we're in a place now to contribute to that over the winter. PCB, the provider collaborative at region, is going through a reset. We fed back before with Professor Thomas now in the chair's position for the provider collaborative board as well. The two key programmes of work, the clinical integration group and the corporate collaboration board, are now resetting and talking a bit more explicitly. I use the what, by, when and who language. So what's the programme of decision making? What key work streams are being mobilised? So we can come back to boards before the start of the new year and be very clear about kind of the expectations of decision making for boards to consider over that period. And we have a paper later on the agenda about some further development with the provider collaborative in the establishment of a joint committee. If the board approve that, it will give us a stronger and clearer platform for joint decision making across the provider collaborative. From a trust perspective, I'll join Professor Thomas in thanking colleagues. It feels still the right thing to do at every meeting, particularly with the innovation and the tenacity that colleagues are displaying every day, either in some of the big strategic programmes or recovery programmes, or more readily managing flow and patient services every day under pressure. We took some reports through, Leanne might touch on this a bit when we talk about the IPR, but for November at least, we're starting to see some small improvements in certain metrics, whether that's not meeting criteria to reside or some of our urgent care performance. Very difficult to do immediate cause and effect, but the feedback is a lot of the work that our clinical operational teams have been doing around SDEC and frailty and some of the other areas of focus are starting to have an impact. So whilst winter will be pressured, no doubt, it feels like our teams and the resources we put in place are on a decent platform as we head into that space. I will touch briefly on two more items. Industrial action, we're aware obviously that the RCN ballot then reached the threshold for certain organisations around industrial action with dates signalled last week for the 15th and the 20th of December. It is a live set of actions now around derogations, plans and letters about which trusts are actually going to use that mandate to take forward industrial action. At the moment, we're still working through which trusts have been identified and which haven't. Communications coming through last night that we now need to consider. Regardless of notification, our colleagues are working through mitigating plans for as and when any industrial action takes place. I think I've said this before in other platforms, Chair, but the right to have voices heard from our professional groups through their unions and the right then to make sure that the mandates they get we can support is really important. It's a core part of our country's kind of infrastructure. It's a core part of our workforce's rights and the way that they're represented. So as an organisation, we recognise that and support the actions needed to enable that to happen. That's the way we are focusing on this. And my ask with all colleagues is to recognise that and be kind to each other and make sure we work through the process as best we can. And then just finally, Chair, a quick parish notice on leadership appointments and leadership change. So delighted to announce that our new Chief People Officer, Ali Bolson, Alison, she prefers to be called Ali, will join us formally in January, but is already interacting with the organisation at the moment. Ali joins us from Wrightington, Wigan and Lee as a very experienced Chief People Officer. I do have to there'll be plenty of opportunity for me to do this again, Chair, but more formally at board, I need to recognise that Bridget will be leaving us in April. And will be joining Blackpool Teaching Hospitals as their chief nurse. Delighted that Bridget is staying in the patch, so we get to get Bridget's leadership in the provider collaborative board space still. So Bridget will leave with our love and best wishes, but we'll have lots of opportunity to embarrass her over the next 4 or 5 months or so. And by some twist of fate, we have Leanne Cooper with us, deputising today for Scott in the Chief Operating Officer role. Leanne is also leaving us in around January, February, March time, still to be confirmed, to take on her first executive board position as the Chief Operating Officer at Airedale Energy Foundation Trust. Leanne's been at board a number of times and also acted up over a very difficult period at year end and the planning phase. Also leaves with our love and best wishes. So congratulations, Leanne. Thank you very much. And that finishes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll take questions. Jill, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to bring this up under the IPR, but as Aaron mentioned it, I'm concerned about not meeting the criteria to reside because it's impacting on a lot of our performance. And Aaron mentioned the new money, and I think it would be very helpful when we see the new money through to have a very explicit plan from our partners about how that money will actually be used to impact on provision within the community so that the not meeting the criteria to reside patients can be discharged. And I think we should see that at board. It's becoming one of our most serious problems affecting our performance. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to, as chair, just say yes, Jill, that will come through when we get more information about the funding, and obviously it will come to board and it will impact on finance, performance, operations, etc. So thank you for those comments. We'll definitely come to board. Adrian?
Thank you. Just a quick question under the national update to the autumn budget statement around the new hospitals programme and whether there are any assurances other than the political assurances that we've had today. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. So, yeah, obviously we were keeping an eye out for any announcements in that space. The new Prime Minister had previously committed to the 2019 mandate, of which the new hospitals programme was part. And within the statement, there is a continued commitment to capital investment increasing and the new hospitals programme. Now, we're awaiting an announcement from DHSC and the Treasury as to the quantum of the budget now available for the new hospitals programme. So we can then start to consider affordability and what the business case development might look like as a result. So I think that's due either later in December or early January. So we'll start to get a sense then of quantum of these statements so we can bring that back to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a question from me to the Chief Exec. Bridget, we will say formal thanks to you and also to yourself, Leanne. Wish you the best in the future. So forgive me for my question to the Chief Exec now, which is what assurance can you give to the board that we will have the executive support as we continue our drive towards SOF 2?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So obviously now we've got Scott in the Chief Operating Officer role and an opportunity to look again at the structures within operations with Leanne's kind of announcement. So I'll be working with Scott to make sure we've got that strength in depth operationally. The notice period for Bridget allows us then to go out to the market and recruit a colleague and hopefully have them onboarded as part of some handover with Bridget at that point. I'm working with a company in terms of the executive search and also with regional and national colleagues about talent management, succession planning of the type of calibre of chief nurse we will need to continue the journey that Bridget started, particularly in that quality, safety and nurse leadership function. So good assurance, Chair, on the process that we've got in place to make sure that we continue with that journey. and we'll make sure that we get the right colleague again to join us as an executive.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we'll then note the Chief Exec's report and the comments made. We'll move on to item 159. This is the Head Governor update, and I'll ask Lorraine Crossley-Close to present her paper. Lorraine?
I think you can just take it as read, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Then I will ask colleagues if there's any questions for the Head Governor on her paper. No, thank you. Thank you, Lorraine. We note the contents of your paper. We'll move on then to item 160. This is a summary of the confidential investigations report on behalf of the Trust and the investigations by design report. I will allow the Chief Medical Officer to present this. I just want to preamble it by just saying we are clinically led and we are data driven, and this report is looking really at a historical issue where we have colleagues who are still working in the Trust. Some of the issues and principles that we adhere to in the NHS is courage and compassion and principles. And you'll see in the paper, you know, that quite rightly, the board is asked to apologise to our two colleagues for the experiences that they have had during this period. But we'll move directly to the report. I just want to preamble by saying we are transparent, we are open, and we should support our whistleblowing colleagues. And this report provides us with guidance on where we should go next. I'll pass you over to our Chief Medical Officer.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm going to present the update on the investigation by design report. Just to clarify, we've been looking into concerns that were raised in trauma orthopaedics since 2017 and since then. This report is not about any clinical aspects of work. This report is about whether medical leaders acted appropriately when they had concerns raised to them, whether they recognised and treated the consultants who raised concerns as whistleblowers, and about that detriment. So the 47-page document contains all of this, but I'm just going to pull out the relevant parts and then comment on the learning. So initially, the first thing was the concerns raised by our two consultants into a colleague's practice. And the report has said that our Trust medical leaders at the time did not respond in the most appropriate way. However, it was very clear in that although there were shortcomings in the way matters were addressed, there was no evidence of cover-up or collusion in respect of the way that medical leaders responded. With regard to the investigations, there were two previous investigations. One of those had terms of reference that were adequately written, but the second one, it was felt that they were not fit for purpose to cover the specific concerns. In addition, there was a missed opportunity. So although it's not a right of someone who raises concerns to be involved in the writing of terms of reference to investigate that, it's a missed opportunity not to involve people. And we've sort of changed what we do going forwards in that. With regards to whistleblowing, the investigation found that at the time, the medical leaders did not recognise and treat the two consultants as whistleblowers. They didn't recognise that concerns were raised under the freedom to speak up. Or else they said they recognised it, but we didn't follow the relevant policy at the time. And so the outcome of that is that the investigators found that there was a breach of the Trust freedom to speak up raising concerns policy. However, they talked to a number of people and said that it suggests that there is increased confidence in raising concerns within the Trust. And if we remember that this was only undertaken in the early part or middle part of last year, so that in that time, there was an increased confidence in raising concerns in the Trust compared to previously. But there wasn't as much understanding of the freedom to speak up guardian's role and identity. In terms of detriment, the two complainants said they'd suffered detriment. They found detriment in 3 of 14 claims for one of our consultants, but didn't find anything to uphold it in the complaints by the second person. There were a number of learning points identified in the report. I can't remember how many. All of those have been pulled out of it and form part of an action plan going forwards. A number of those actions are already complete and a number of those are ongoing. The plan is that they will be followed up through the appropriate board subcommittee and we'll update regularly on that. So in terms of the report, that's really all I wanted to bring out around that. The actions that we were asked were discuss and consider, acknowledge and support the gratitude of the board towards the colleagues, acknowledge and endorse the apology stated, and then confirm how we'd like to receive ongoing assurance. So I think I'd like to reiterate that I'm very grateful to people for raising concerns. It is both an expectation and a duty of doctors to do that. And so it's an expectation and duty of us to respond to those concerns in the right way. And we will do differently going forwards. And we apologise for the detriment that was caused by the failings of how we responded to those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Just before I open it up to any questions from colleagues, you referred to a subcommittee. So one of the questions the board obviously will have is, how do we gain assurance that this is actually, the change is happening and the change is being embedded? So which subcommittee will oversee that?
So I was going to ask to discuss this because originally we had an orthopaedic task and finish group, and the terms of reference of that group said that we would follow it up within that, going through to quality committee. However, most of these actions really relate to policies, training, learning and development, and it feels more appropriate that they would go to people committee. So that was going to be my ask of quality committee, to, if we could do that. I'm quite happy to take those, and I'm quite happy to bring it back to whenever we need for updates as a separate item.
Potentially two subcommittees, quality and people. I
think we would ask that quality moved it to people, because I think the quality aspect of this report is, just to be clear, this is about process. With the people committee. Okay, thank you. I'll ask the chief executive if he wants to make any comments before I make them.
Yeah, I do, Chair, if that's okay. So I'm just going to reiterate my gratitude again to Sham Kumar and Simon Ratcliffe as the two colleagues that raised the issues originally, which we've done before as a board. Our commitment to those two colleagues was to see through properly the investigation and review of the concerns that they raised, and also to look at the way that that was done and the impact on them. And this report is the final part of that process that we committed to do with Sham and Simon. It is an apology to them both for how long it's taken to this point, and also for the experience that they had through that process. It's important that they also hear that from me. I will say that I am very pleased with the actions that have followed, the commitments from colleagues to make change, and the continued focus on improvement that we've got through the recovery support programme. So the themes of incident raising, freedom to speak up, learning lessons, and then reflecting any wider applicability across other services. They're all key themes that we've been overseeing for the last 12 or 18 months under that programme. And I think it's a reminder for a continual check and challenge as a board, executives and non-executives, to listen with real empathy and curiosity, and to follow through properly on any issues that we see raised. And this is a very salient lesson for us to learn in the way that we take forward our improvement. It is clear this isn't the first time that the board has heard that this isn't a reflection of not listening to concerns or not picking up issues that were raised, but the way in which we do that and the impact of that is really stark. So it's important that we educate, train and develop all colleagues continually to recognise these issues and to deal with them effectively. And that's also part of our continuous improvement program.
Okay, thank you. Okay, colleagues, I'll open it up. Jill, we've got you first. Jill Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. I too want to say thank you to the people who raised these issues. And I think particularly I want to reflect back on how much work has been done under Freedom to Speak Up to actually improve our processes and procedures. And I know I've been involved with it, just how much more effective they are now than they used to be, whether that's looking at staff training, the review of the policy, the feedback of people who use the service, how it's led. And I think particularly the pulling together the lessons learned from a number of sources, not just Freedom to Speak Up, but serious incidents, complaints, grievances, etc. And the team coming together to look across the board at what lessons we can learn, I think will be much more effective. My question I have, though, is for Jane. And although Jane says this is about those processes and how we looked at it, I just wanted to ask Jane, what evidence do we have now that we can successfully monitor that medics are operating at the right level of competence? How do we make sure that where there are concerns, not just through freedom to speak up, but through the monitoring of medical competence, that's being picked up?
Gosh, that's a huge question. So there are things around, I guess, the wider policies and procedures. So what we're trying to ensure is that all of our work is based on evidence. So we're using, again, being data-driven, clinically led. So we're using data from GIRFT, etc., to benchmark and compare ourselves to as far as possible. Most of that would be around services rather than individuals. There is an ask and an expectation that as part of your medical appraisal, which is not a public document, but you reflect on your work and you are aware of, sort of, if you were a surgeon like me, you'd be aware of national rates of complications, etc., be able to compare yourself against that. We're doing some work with the appraisal team to ensure that we are asking for particular information so that across, I'm going to use trauma and orthopaedics because it's obviously the service we're looking at here, across trauma and orthopaedics, that all people who were doing hip replacements were presenting the same kind of data, and there should be sort of a comparison there. And we also ask that that data is shared at things like audit meetings, governance meetings, and so that teams have their own ownership and know around where they are, if they're an outlier, and can then sort of act upon that. So
thank you. That's really helpful.
So the sort of individual responsibilities, team responsibilities, and then sort of wider responsibilities of the trust, really.
Thanks, Jane. Could you fix that?
It's just, so this, I think that's the question. I think on reflection, and if you think of the work that we've developed within the quality governance assurance framework, the mortality review infrastructure that we've put in place, and the new thematic way that we're overseeing any incidents or concerns raised, we're able to have a much earlier insight into any key themes of practice or kind of review points that we'd need to take forward. And then we've got a really good infrastructure now with the new clinical leadership structures that Jane's put forward to take that up with that thematic learning, going back to the care groups, making sure that we've got that infrastructure of reflection and feedback in place. So there's a number of ways in which we've rewired ourselves to make sure that we've got the infrastructure right at the outset to give colleagues the best opportunity to be the most skilled and competent they can be. And then we've got a series of pieces of work we've put in place that says, actually, if that isn't happening, we're able to spot that much earlier and take some actions in terms of improvement or reflection. Recognising that healthcare delivery obviously isn't a perfect set of scenarios, and we do make errors, and there are harms that are created as a result, and we need to make sure that where we're outside of any reasonable parameters, we're taking action and reflection and learning as quickly as possible.
As you can imagine, colleagues, we've got a number of questions. I've got 6, I think, so I'll come to you in turn, so just be a little bit patient. Karen first. Karen Deeney, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just three questions from me, if I may. The first is a detail, and I think we'll pick this up in the minutes, but I think there may be an extra note on page 47 about this not being monitored by the People Committee. So if that's just captured accurately from today in terms of appropriate governance, that would be excellent. The second point relates to the distribution and the sharing of the report with all of those people involved in the investigation, which is excellent practice. And this may be picked up in the action plan, but is there also in place effective support for anybody who was involved, in addition to having had the report shared with them? And my third question is, how far does the action plan from this investigation interface and join up with the cultural transformation work programme that we have in place? How are those two connected and integrated? And I ask that simply because there is some history of a whole range of series of different action plans in other parts of the Trust's improvement work. So how does this one integrate with the cultural improvement and those connected assurances? Thank you.
Forgotten the second question. Oh, about the distribution.
It was about support.
Okay.
Yeah. So the second one was, yeah, the report's been shared. How are those people effectively supported should they wish? Thank you.
Karen, the report has been shared with those people who are involved in it, and it's been shared face to face. There is one meeting still to take place, and there's one meeting that's not possible to do that, but it's been shared face to face. So I've had the conversation, spoken about the report, etc., and have offered support at that time. So I've done that. That's all been done by me. And then absolutely the third point, it will interface with the culture and OD work. I guess this sits as a separate item in terms of reporting through on these particular actions, but it will sit alongside it and should dovetail. I think some of it really is very specific to ensuring that I've got the appropriate training for our clinical leads and doctors. So it will sit alongside, but just be kept separate in order that I address all of those points.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave Governor Lorraine Crossley-Close. Lorraine?
I just wondered, is there a place at the moment in the medical schools about current cultural and behavioural policies in place, and an emphasis made that although it's a horrible word, whistleblowing is the right way to behave and not the wrong way to behave? All medical practitioners take an oath not to harm the patient, but by hiding or being afraid of actually speaking out about people or wrongdoings, should be really educated right from day one that it's not wrong to do that, it is correct to do that, and that is the only way that we are actually going to change behaviour and change people's attitudes. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, Lorraine. And actually, the answer is I don't really know. We've asked medical schools. We haven't really had a great deal back. I know Richard posed exactly that question previously. I don't know if Sarah's got any insights from Lancaster. I suspect not on this specific thing, but it is something that I have asked our education team to explore with the deaneries around it, because we do hear it as a separate, drumbeat or a rumour, and that junior doctors are sometimes afraid to speak out. And that's a perception, I think, rather than a learned behaviour for most of those. And we absolutely do need to get in as early as possible.
Just interrupt, Jane. From a board's perspective, from an assurance perspective, yourself and Richard could come back to the board, say in February, with a culmination of your discussions with the universities, just to find out what their responses are. Lorraine, we'll let you know through here what the feedback is from our universities around this issue in their undergraduate curriculums.
Thank you.
Okay, Liz Sedgley, over to you, please.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Jane, for the your summary of the report. It was really helpful. So looking forward, what work have we done with teams, not only in TNO but across the whole organisation? Because you can imagine this could happen anywhere where there are differences in clinical practice. How do we encourage clinicians to challenge and have difficult conversations, but in a very supportive way, from the basis of it's about patient experience and improving standards and driving quality behind these check-in challenges amongst themselves, but also what input do both the nursing teams and the AHPs have into those conversations, and are their input and their insight valued and supported? Thanks.
Just on the last point, I think the insight and the value, the nursing staff, the HPs are valued differentially. They don't always have parity of voice and parity. I think where you've got teams that function well, that sort of is more or less an automatic happen. But we've traditionally had a very hierarchical view of things, and that takes a lot of time to change. Again, I forgot the first part of the question was around how do we go forwards with that. That is really the culture and OD work. You know, that we need to alter how people view team working. There's a fear amongst a lot of people around having incident reports submitted. There is not necessarily been an understanding of the whole point of reporting incidents is not about pointing fingers, but about us looking forward and finding out where it's gone. Because by and large, it's systems that go wrong, not individual clinicians by as a whole. So there's a whole lot of work going on with the culture and OD people, which isn't limited to trauma and orthopaedics. It forms part of the we're just developing the leadership development programs for our clinical leads, which will go to them first, but then I would like that to go out to all of our consultants and SAS doctors. And within that, we have got specific areas around speaking up, raising concerns, difficult conversations, and all of those that people can test out. We haven't had that for probably 3 or 4 years because of COVID. Lots of things went by the wayside. So people may have had that training previously, but haven't necessarily had it updated. So we need to bring that back in. We've also got things planned as part of it, bringing in people like the GMC and the BMA to support with what's a reasonable expectation of an employee, what is the expectation of the GMC around this, to remind and reinforce people around those. And then it's about us role modelling all of those behaviours as well, but also supporting people, because having difficult conversations is difficult, and we need to support people to do that in the right way as well as train them. So lots of work to go on and lots of little incremental changes, I think, but we're trying to build it into leadership programs going forwards, which are not just for people in leadership roles, both in the medical sphere, but also within the more general trust leadership programs, so that everyone has a voice and is not afraid to use it.
Okay, we'll follow that up, I think, through the relevant subcommittee, if that's okay. Liz, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Phil, and then I'll ask Adrian and then Sarah. Phil?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think it was an excellent question from Lorraine, and I think it's definitely been picked up by Jane. The work I was going to mention around the culture, because it isn't about blaming people, is the just work that's going on, and it'd be good that we start to see how that's weaved into that. But we often see what's going wrong, Mike, and I think it's important for us to remember and perhaps to see as well. You know, this happens daily. I know from speaking and meeting with medical colleagues, all the things Lorraine said is that their oath they take and their commitment, you know, they want to uphold that, and they do report things every day. And I think it'd be good to remember that. Maybe I don't know how, because, you know, saying six things were recorded or 2,000 things, it doesn't really tell us anything. Where the benefit of this report, it actually gives us some substance of what somebody raised and how it was dealt with. And I think it'd be useful to see, certainly here for board members, what does go on daily, you know, how many are raised, not just overall incidents, but, you know, where are our doctors raising these concerns and what's happening with them, because they are doing it every day.
We'll take that as a proposal, Phil, because it
helps
Mike. Our assurance work. So could I ask the executives to just look at that and then come back with a report and an update on the just work?
Thanks, Mike. I think Phil's point's really good. It's around 26 to 30,000 incidents every year that get raised, and they are used through the structures that we talked about earlier to generate improvement reflections in our services. When those things don't work effectively, actually the fact that we've had to do a focused piece of work on it speaks volumes, actually, that when it doesn't work, it's a big impact, because actually the expectation is, as an organisation like ours, that should just work really effectively, and when it doesn't, it has, like I said, it has a big impact. So I think we could probably use things like our integrated performance report when we talk about progress around quality and service improvement, that we include some of the key changes that have happened as a result of the work we progress. I think the just and restorative culture will feature as part of our cultural improvement programme updates. So rather than a separate report, I'd like to propose that we include it in the culture programme updates, Chair, if that's okay.
Yep, I'm happy with that. Colleagues happy with that? Okay, thank you. I'll take the last two questions, Adrian and Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. So thanks, Jane, for all your work and bringing this to the committee. There's a lot of learning, obviously, here. Really pleased to see that there's no cover-up, no collusion, and that's very firmly stated. That's gives us reassurance there, assurance. Really welcome this coming and being discussed and developed further through the work of the People Committee, and obviously linked to that culture work. So I think that's a real great way forward, really, to tie up a number of strands there. On reflecting on this report, it really struck me that there were two aspects to it: the process and the pace. And it's, I guess, get that sense that process we're good at. Pace comes up continuously, doesn't it? And I recognise, reading a lot of the comments, that there's a lot of avoidable impact had we been able to improve the pace. And so I feel assured in terms of the process work that you've outlined, but I'm not sure that I feel assured in terms of the pace work. And I'd just like your thoughts on that, really. Thank you.
Okay, right. So I think there is a difference, because one of the recommendations of this, but was already undertaken, was combining the role of medical director and responsible officer. So those responsibilities clearly sit in one place. And so in terms of responding to things in future, I think that is a different position to be in. Do you mean pace in terms of how soon we're moving these things, the actions on, or assurance that should the same thing happen today to me, that pace will happen? Okay.
Yeah, so once the process is in train, that we actually work with the process timelines. And
So
I see that repeatedly. Sorry for
yeah, no.
in other areas.
So I think as well as obviously the role now being me being responsible officer as well, chief medical officer, we also have a deputy medical director whose role is around professional standards and who has got time to give to this. So that's another important thing that has got some working time in the week to drive all of this forwards. We have got a good system of meetings, including a group that sort of I won't say tracks progress, but sort of checks in on a regular basis about, you know, ensuring that we've done things like occupational health support in, etc., where we need to, but keeps those things on track. So I think, again, the process that we have got that process in place that I think drives the pace better, because we've got more resource allocated to it, and that is based in one place. We're not trying to draw in lots of different strands.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Okay. The theme of pace, I think, is not unrelated to process. So in having good processes and good infrastructure, and when they're operating effectively, pace does not become an issue. Part of the reason that we've had perennial feedback on how long it takes to resolve issues isn't an action pace, it's the sustainability. So the inference of things have taken long to resolve, my experience, having looked at the detail, is it's not because people didn't do what they should or could have done quickly. It's the impact of that has meant that the thing that we're trying to fix still features when people come back. So the inference is, we looked at this a year ago and it's still the case. Your pace on delivery isn't good enough. Now, you'll have heard me at board draw a real distinction between, I call it bigger, better, faster, more language, pace, we need to get it done, versus sustainability and having good process that we know that when we take action, it's stuck and sustained. So we still need, it's another balance question, Adrian, on that. We need to get these things done quickly and effectively, but in such a way that means we're very confident that that issue has been resolved permanently and will be sustained in terms of improvement. So, you know, it's a constant tension with the executive function in particular around that, because where we take too long to deal with these issues, two things happen. The contemporaneous nature of the issue gets lost, and the kind of focus and impetus can get lost. And then the impact on patients and colleagues as a result is something that we need to avoid. So it's a constant tension in the discussions around the execution of these pieces of work.
I think within that process there is something around sort of the volume of resource that we've got that we can allocate to it. We have trained 8 case investigators and case managers in the last year. We're just about to undergo some case investigator training, so that we're not trying to rely on a really small resource to undertake necessary investigations, etc. So yeah, we tried to resource it as well as that.
We'll continue to follow that up through the People's Committee. I think they should face.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you. So I think just to add to what's already been said in terms of recognising colleagues who've come forward, and I think not just the courage but the tenacity to continue to say, actually, we're not happy. This hasn't been dealt with to our satisfaction, which takes courage as well, but I think also tenacity. We've rightly focused on the people and the process in terms of relationships and how things are done. I think Aaron did touch very briefly on the risk of harm if we don't get this right. And so I just wanted to comment briefly on that, I think from a quality committee perspective. So we considered the Royal College of Surgeons closure report at quality committee last month. That's mentioned in the RSP update. And one of the things we interrogated there was actually how will we know that the actions that need to be taken from a quality perspective are embedded, and how will we see that assurance? And so we're particularly looking at clinical audit, and also that this will be monitored through the surgery group as well. So I think that's really important that we balance those two things. So although the sort of going forward it comes to people committee, I think from quality committee perspective, we still have that ability to seek assurance that there aren't harms, and actually that if something is going awry, we'll see it. So I just wanted to comment on that. And then the other point to ask is how the board wants to seek assurance going forward. We saw the action plan, I think 5 months ago or 4 months ago. So I would welcome an update against that action plan at board before it becomes part of the annual cycle. I don't know if maybe January that could come through, but that would feel reasonable. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Good point. And just to add to that triangulation as well, if Jane, if you could just work with the company secretary to arrange for the non-exec directors to meet with the multidisciplinary T&O team.
Yes, yeah. So I had, as we've done with other teams, the plan was that I went with Damien when we first had the Royal College of Surgeons report, but we were going to go back and think round things up. So yeah, we'll do that.
Multidisciplinary team, so we get a real feel of the area of things.
And actually to pick that up, it was specifically multidisciplinary team actually that we were thinking about when we had that discussion happen. So from a non-exec perspective, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, brilliant. So we're going to get that in the next diary. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, if I can bring us then back to the recommendations, then we're asked to discuss and consider the attached report. We feel we've done that. Yeah, thank you. Acknowledge and support our sincere gratitude of the board towards Mr. Kumar and Mr. Radcliffe, who raised their clinical concerns. Acknowledge and endorse the apologies stated for Mr. Kumar and Mr. Radcliffe, who was judged to have suffered detriment as a result of their raising the concerns. Yeah. And confirm how the board would like to receive the ongoing assurance regarding addressing the findings. And I think we have explored that. There's some immediate actions and then some more ongoing. Yeah, colleagues, happy with that? Thank you. Jane, if you could, through your Chief Medical Officer's role, just thank everyone concerned and bring this to the attention of the board. Okay, colleagues, we'll move on then to quality and safety. Item 161, the CQC and Royal College of Surgeons improvement plans. And I'll move to our Director of Government.
Chair. So for people following on the pack, I'm on page 99. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to take the paper as read, but there's just a couple of points that I wanted to flag to people. I think just reflecting on the previous agenda item, the Chief Executive used the term quickly and effectively and about the importance of getting that balance right. Then he spoke about tension, but it's a positive tension because you've got to constantly be challenging around pace versus the quality and the assurance that you've banked to demonstrate that we're in a good place with these recommendations. You would have to go some distance to find a better example of that positive tension than this particular paper coming up, because there are a considerable number of actions, 197 based on, I think it's about 120 recommendations. So that's a lot that you have to move at a pace and show progress with. And you'll recall at last month's meeting, I was quite clear in recognising that we'd suffered something of a lull It's nice to be here today to say that we've recovered some of that position. It's good to be here today to say that we've done a risk stratification exercise to make sure that those recommendations, the must-dos, the should-dos, and a subset of should-dos, which is a should-do that does have patient safety relevance, and had the CQC seen examples of it, it would have been a must-do. So it's a sort of honorary must-do. And we've rescheduled that work over the course of November, December, January and February to smooth out, if you like, and avoid that sort of speed bump effect that we created for ourselves at the end of October. And I'm pleased to say we continue with our support and review panels. They're relatively successful, they're well attended, people are engaged, people are bringing forward their recommendations that they want to propose as closed. There's a great deal of tolerance testing of the evidence that people bring to that to make sure that it's robust. Just on page 108, there's a new table there that hasn't featured in previous reports that shows you the spread of those actions over the forthcoming December and Q4. And then my last point, you'll recall in the October paper, we got into a really positive habit of sharing with you real, live, earthy examples of where a change created from a must-do had impacted in a reality rather than in my ivory tower. And we spoke about several examples. We're continuing with that because we need to demonstrate the so what. For all of this, it's only worth it if it actually makes a difference to how our staff and patients experience working here or receiving care here. So we've done the same again this month, and we'll continue to do that. So our examples this month are listed, I think, on about page 108 or 9. So we've got must do 126, must do 67, and should do 25. I'm happy to take any questions the board has.
Okay. Just for bringing our non-exec directors, quick question from me. Came up in the board last month, and you've escalated it this month. What is the support that's being given to the Medicine Care Group?
So Medicine Care Group have in total above what they would usually have. We've had a resignation of their governance business partner. We've not left a gap there. We've parachuted somebody into that position, so that's full time. We've then supplemented that with resource of probably about a day per week from 2 other governance business partners, one from Integrated Care, one from Core Clinical. So they're supporting the temporary arrangement around the medicine business partner. We have two days per week of a governance consultant that we've been using on the niche exercise. So she's lent a bit of time to them. So in total, I think formally it counts as 2 days, but probably in reality it's a lot more than that. But they have significant support. Oh, yes, sorry, and a project manager in there as well, supporting from formally from the QI team.
And I think NHSI, as part of the recovery support program, have also offered some support into medicine as well. So.
Thank you for that. I'll ask you and then Sarah. You?
Just to confirm, we considered this in detail at the last quality committee, and we were reassured by the reprioritisation process that had taken place. Obviously, the assurance will come when we see the actions out of that. But it was good to see that a real consideration had been given about the clinical impact of particularly the should-dos that were falling behind scale, and the reprioritisation to the priority should-dos. It seems a slightly straight up must-dos, priority should-dos, and then should-dos, but actually it gives us a sense of importance of those actions. And I think it's probably important to say that our commissioners were present at that conversation from the ICB, and they confirmed that they were supportive of the approach and the reprioritisation, and they are invited to the review panels that also Sarah attends. I'm not sure if they've actually made it, but they're actually aware that they have an open invitation to attend those. So I think we felt much more confident about the set of actions that missed the October deadline. Richard did acknowledge that maybe a similar piece of work needed to be done looking at the March deadline, because there's a bunching of actions to be achieved again in March, and I think that may need a look at in early January. But we did consider this in detail for the board to understand.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take that as part of our triangulation of evidence. Thanks.
Thank you. I think just to follow up on that, I did attend one of the support and review panels actually, where we had some of that additional resource present, and actually I saw the difference that had made in terms of that reprofiling and considering the actual dates when things may be completed by. And in that same discussion, the medicine team also confirmed that they felt with that extra support they could move forward. So just to sort of reiterate really what Richard said. I think I just had a comment on exactly those examples you gave, Richard, about the impact that the recommendations and the actions have made. So I think the one on page 109, number 34, point 34 should do 25, which is around safety huddles. You can absolutely see that those have been put in place, and the audit demonstrates that they're happening and making a difference. I think the point around the pharmacy changes for me was a bit about process and not about impact. So it says we've recruited some staff, but what it's not actually demonstrating to is that as a result of that the medicine is being managed in a safe way. So I think if we could think about what assurance we can provide for that, I'd find that very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Can you get a response to that, please, Richard? Not now, but okay, thank you. Karen, got your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Richard, for your clarity. I had 3 questions, 2 of which have already been covered by Hugh and Sarah. So the third one relates to the ongoing delivery of this programme. It's great to see the refresh, but I wonder whether, in terms of the concerns and issues and mitigations, whether there is also factored into there the anticipated impact of winter pressures and industrial action, and how that might be mitigated so that we can be assured that we'll see the continued progress reflected in the report.
Thank you, Karen. So on industrial action, at the time that the paper was written, no, we didn't factor that into our consideration of the paper. I think if that transpires to be the case, then we would reference it in the December version of the paper. So thank you. That's a helpful suggestion. In terms of the winter pressures that particularly medicine experience regrettably every winter, I think that has been factored in, and hence why we've done a lot of lean in from corporate resource to help support the care group around what they need to achieve. That there will always be an argument for more, and really I think the package that they have at the moment is helpful to them, but I'm in a frequent dialogue with the care group around if there is more that we can do to help support the care group.
Thank you, Richard. It would be really helpful if we could see those 2 mitigations really explicitly reflected in the way you've described in December. Thank you.
Okay. Richard, thank you for that paper. We're asked to note a number of points which are in our agendas, to take stock of the revised trajectory, and also to escalate the potential impact of operational pressures that on the must-dos and should-dos, particularly the support around the medicine group, which you do. So we will follow that up through the various, and it's heartening to see that the quality sub have looked at this in detail as well. Colleagues, we're happy to accept the papers and the recommendations. Okay, thank you. Stay with us, Richard. We've got item 161, the niche external investigations assurance.
Thank you, Chair. So again, I'll take the paper as read, but I did have a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share with you. On page 123 of the pack, you will see a small graph there. And to give you an indication of how fluid our work around those urology recommendations is, the green line and the yellow line have now crossed and passed in opposite directions at some pace. So level 3 NIAF compliance is now up to 38 recommendations, and level 2 compliance is now down to 16. I have forwarded an updated graph so that you can see that better. I just wanted to make reference to the case note review. Again, more fluidity about this. So when we wrote the paper, it's down there as accurate. Since then, we've received that in draft form. We've checked the factual accuracy, and by close of play yesterday, we'd sent back our factual accuracy points on that case note review. It was a broadly positive experience, I think, for both Niche and ourselves to have that exercise completed last month, and we await the finalised version. Not dissimilar to the previous item that I was just talking about, the CQC report. We're going to start to drop into this paper from next month our so what's. So we're going to find those examples whereby you can have a recommendation, but what does it actually mean in reality? How is it going to make a difference to our staff and patients? So we'll start to adopt that from the next report onwards and give you examples. And I just wanted to say, at this time, I don't have any concerns that we are going to take each and every niche recommendation to level 3. And the majority of that evidence will be with Niche to assess probably before Christmas. Excuse me. The final deadline for getting every last bit of evidence to our colleagues at Niche Investigations is the 20th of January. But I think the bulk of that will be with them before Christmas. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Questions? You?
Yeah, confirm again that we consider this in detail. And I think I think it's about triangulation, because it gave quite a lot of assurance, the informal feedback that has been received after the notes review of Niche could see significant changes that occurred compared to when they did basically the same process. We're talking about a couple of, I lose track of time, but a year or so back, and I think that's really important. Even though we haven't had the formal feedback, there was nothing raised at that time that said, you know, good grief, guys, sort this. So I think that's really important. The other point to make is that we have asked that at some point, you know, probably in the new year, when Richard and colleagues feel it's appropriate, that we have some clinical feedback to the Quality Committee, rather than just the formal reports, that we actually hear from clinicians as to how things have actually changed. So we get, you know, I fully support Richard giving us more flesh on the bone, if you like, about what this means in practice, but actually hearing from senior clinicians themselves as to how things have improved.
Could I add to that? Because just to say, first of all, we're opening comments. It's really useful if the chairs of the subcommittees said at the relevant items, you know, that they've been discussed in detail. So it does help us with using evidence, data, and triangulation. So thank you for that. The second point, yes, I think you should meet clinicians, but again, if I can ask the company secretary, it'd be useful at some point, Richard, if the non-exec directors met the urology multidisciplinary team as well, please.
Myself and Paul are in a dialogue about facilitating a session so that you get to hear it from the horse's mouth.
And I don't think we should look to necessarily duplicate things, Chair. I mean, I think that just needs to occur for our assurance. Really.
Yeah, and it helps with the triangulation. So thank you for that. Okay, Karen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Richard. I have two questions. The first just relates to the 72 recommendations set out on page 120. So we can see the monitoring and the excellent progress made in respect of those that were organisation specific, so 51 for the trust. How are the rest of those recommendations, though, outside of our organisation, but potentially relevant, being taken forward and monitored? How well are we cited on those?
So 51 recommendations for us is enough. I'm not here to project manage other organisations in how they handle their recommendations. I am partially cited on them in so much as you're right, Karen, that though they are for other authorities, they could have a relevance to us. And therefore, when we've seen that opportunity to explore that, we are doing that in the background. I have a regular meeting with colleagues from NHSE who have some responsibility for those recommendations, and they are in a dialogue with Niche about making sure that their evidence is being sent to them in a similar sort of time frame as the exercise that we're doing here for our 50-odd recommendations.
Right. So thank you, Richard. That makes sense, and I'm not for a moment suggesting you take on the project management of that wider picture. It's really how. My question is, we can see how we organisationally are held to account and our delivery against those recommendations. I'm just not clear how those other organisations are held to account for their relevant recommendations, and how we can be assured about that.
Okay, I'm going to ask Chief Exec to come in there, Richard. So that's a process outside of the trust. So Chief Exec?
Yeah, just to be clear, Karen, it was picked up at the Regional System Improvement Board that we participate in each month when the Niche report was landed, and action was taken by the chair of that board to make those connections with the other organisations that have some responsibility for delivery. And there's an outstanding action at that System Improvement Board to bring back the outcomes of those actions so we can make sure we can reflect them as part of our own improvement work. I think that's a reasonable action for us to raise at the next System Improvement Board on the agenda, just to get some feedback as to where they are, and then we can start to bring it back into the board under this item so we can show that kind of connection. Thank you,
Aaron. That's really helpful. And my second question is one that is an ambitious question, I recognise, but is there a time frame or an anticipated time frame when we can really see progress towards levels 4 and 5, given that they really reflect sustained and embedded improvement that we're ultimately looking for?
Yes, but that's not an ambitious question. That's exactly what my job is. So I'm committed to getting everything to level 3, and I'm dedicated to spending 2023-24 to get all of those recommendations up to levels 4 and 5, and then critically apply the wider applicability of those recommendations across the remaining services of the organisations, woven into the new quality governance assurance framework.
Thank you. And will we see that more explicitly at the end of stage 5 in terms of the forward plan?
Yeah, I think it would be reasonable at the end of stage 5 to sort of, articulate, A, we're not going to lose track of our organisational memory of this experience, and B, what the forward plan is, because this is all retrospective fixing stuff. The exciting stuff, the really exciting governance stuff, because there is such a thing, is how you do this proactively rather than retrospectively.
I think, Karen, as well, just to support Richard, we'll come back, and I'm very conscious that we don't want to ask the executives to just put in report after report after report to the board. It's a ramping evidence led, but we will be having an operational plan to support our strategy to get to SOF 2. And obviously, when we look at the criteria of what is a good to outstanding trust, we will obviously involve our Director of Governance in putting forward the targets. So I am assuming that those targets will be niche 4 and 5, because that will obviously support our credibility and evidence when we know, we reach SOF 2 and what we need to do if we need to get into SOF 1.
Right, thank you, and really appreciate that being explicitly highlighted like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you for your report. We're asked to review and challenge the contents. Oh, sorry, Liz, it's just been pointed out. Over to you. My apologies.
No worries, Mike. It was a late hand. And first of all, I've got to acknowledge that phrase used by Richard. Words I never thought I would hear. Exciting governance work. It did make me chuckle. Thank you for that one, Richard. So my point here is it's great, and this goes back as well to the previous report from the CQC must do's and should do's. It's great to see those lived, the examples, the changes that have now been embedded and the difference it's making. But my challenge now is we need to hear the patient voice here, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, isn't it? To deliver quality services to patients that meet their needs. So I'd like to see in neurology over the next few months, or even over the next year, if that's how long it takes, but really what difference this has made to urology patients. Because if you think back to when we commissioned the niche report and we received the first report, it was very, very harrowing reading some of those patient experiences. So we now need to know that things have changed significantly for the better, and they will stay significantly better for patients. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. And I'll answer on your behalf. That's all right, Richard. We shall address that, Liz, and look for the evidence in the walkabouts, the ward visits, and meeting the multidisciplinary team. So we'll try and get really into what is the patient's experience. I know, Richard, you'll take note of what Liz has said. Okay, thank you. Colleagues, again, we're asked to review and challenge the contents and seek assurance against our preparation for phase 5 and the progress to date. Are you happy to accept the recommendations? Richard, thank you for all the work. Please pass our thanks on to colleagues and keep us updated. We're now moving on to item 162, Roman 1 to 5. It's a bundle around maternity. We've got Heather Gallagher here. I know before we start that when it comes to questions, Hugh will say that this bundle has been looked at in depth at the Quality Committee. And genuinely, thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to our Chief Nursing Officer.
You still want me to say that?
Chief Nursing Officer, over to you, please, to introduce Heather and take us through the items.
Thank you. So Heather is our Director of Midwifery. In 20 minutes, is going to put salient points for the board, which is really important. And just noting, there is a large bundle that's really important the board cited on our progress against clinical negligence scheme, or CNST, and it's important that we've noted that. So I'm going to hand over to Heather to ensure that she advises us appropriately on what we need to know within this bundle. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Bridget. So I will do maternity update paper first. So just the key highlights from the monthly update. Just make sure you can hear me. The perinatal surveillance model in Appendix 1 shows you the safety intelligence for maternity services for the month. The learning themes in months are detailed in the paper. You'll see the paper refers to a standalone PMRT paper, which we'll discuss later on in the agenda. But the report details and clearly highlights the increase in moderate harms following our reporting improvement work around harms occurred, not harms caused. And you'll see in the SPC charts in the back in the maternity dashboard that that's slowly been levelling off now, which is good. You'll also see in the SPC charts for the maternity dashboard around the rolling stillbirth rate in terms of there being a special cause for improvement. That's due to probably an increase in stillbirths nationally due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously now is showing an improvement in the stillbirth rate. Just to note that Embrace published a perinatal mortality report in October, which shows that we're not an outlier for stillbirths or neonatal deaths, and a full report and benchmarking will go to Quality Committee next month. The paper briefly touches upon CNST. Obviously, we've got standalone papers to go through for the standards, but we're expected to achieve 7 out of 10. And although that's not 10 out of 10 for the safety standards, that's a considerable improvement compared to last year, where we achieved 3 out of 10. We're still awaiting to hear from NHS resolution regarding CNST Year 1 resubmission of evidence to see if we have to pay the incentive scheme back, but we're still waiting for notification of that. The only other thing apart from the Kirkup report that I'll touch on is just to recognise that our midwifery support worker Nicola Potts received the National Chief Midwifery Officer Award. That there was only 2 given out in the country, Nicola being one, and this is the first round of awards. So that's really something to celebrate and certainly put Morecambe Bay on the map. So that's really good. The second part of the maternity report goes into Kirkup's report into East Kent, titled Reading the Signals. In the paper, there's a summary around what the report found into the independent investigation. This was published in October. Unlike other maternity inquiries, it doesn't give a suite of actions. It just recommends 4 sort of broad national recommendations in terms of trying to read the signals throughout the noise, really. His report is really quite interesting. He talks about the need to monitor safe performance, standards of clinical behaviour, and the fact that technical care is not enough, and that we need kindness and compassion weaved into maternity services. He touches on flawed teamwork around different professionals pulling in different directions. And he also talks about organisational behaviour in terms of looking good while doing badly. So within the maternity report, I have put some recommendations for board. Some of those are a combination of what came from NHS England in a letter, but also some that I'm recommending in terms of us reviewing our cultural improvement action plan in light of the report, because although it's a maternity report, it has got connotations for the whole of provider services. And I also touch on in the report some actions specifically for maternity services in terms of really understanding the experience of women and their families and using triangulation of data to really assure ourselves that our services are the best they could be.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. Can I just clarify with you before I take any questions? Have you gone through the bundle there, or are you still on maternity safety update?
No, that's just the update, but some of the papers I won't be talking to a lot. I will just be noting that they've been submitted to you. So that's just the maternity update paper. If you'd like me to continue through the whole bundle before questions.
Each in turn, if that's all right, Heather, we'll take
Yeah.
Okay, so comments? Phil, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's great. Heather, thanks for going through that. It's very clear. There was a point I wanted to make, Mike, which I think is important for us to remember. It goes back to Francis way before the Kent sort of tragedy that's mentioned in the report. And Heather and her colleagues are excellent at patient involvement in the Maternity Voices work. And, you know, I think it's a benchmark for others to follow. But we know from Francis, and it's disappointing because it hasn't been taken on board by people. And then we've seen it at Kent. And my plea is that we don't see it elsewhere, is that, you know, when your back's against the wall and people's lives are at risk, investing in communications and PR isn't the answer. You know, and that's a key recommendation from Bill Kirkup, you know, and it follows, as I say, through other people's reports. You know, the reputation's improved by delivering good care and service and involving people. You know, proof of the pudding's in the eating. It's not through press releases and statements. So whilst that might be my job, I'm the opposite, because as a patient, I just want to, and as a staff member, I just want to see good care. You know, people tell people about good care, and that's how you spread a reputation. Equally, you know, the stats, and I've never seen them proven. You know, you get bad service anywhere. You know, you're bound to tell 10 people you get good service. You probably only tell 1 or 2, but it's so important that we get the care right. And confident that Heather's going that way in terms of involving the patients still, and that's how we'll do it. So it's just minded that when we get into difficult situations, that there isn't a clamber for we must be telling a different story. We're probably already telling the story has got to be one of good care and good quality, Mike, and that would be my request to the board. That we don't think there's a press release or some sort of briefing that's going to make everything okay. It usually isn't.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Phil. We know that. Chief Exec.
It's just a bit of a process update, really. So as an exec team yesterday, we were considering our approach to receiving external reports and how well we have a repository for those, and then distill any thematic actions for programs of work that are already here. So I'm just guarding against a next question, which might say, well, let's bring a report back to board around the cultural update for maternity. We have a cultural improvement programme. We have a work stream established. So what we will be working with is making sure when we have a repository for those external reports, we then have the discipline of checking back as to a gap analysis on what programmes of work have we already got in train that we know are going to point to these recommendations, and do we need to strengthen them, change them, update them, or reflect back this is how we're going to take it forward. And if we do have gaps, are they thematics? Do we need to put something else in place to address them? Because one of our reflections, go back to Adrian's point, is the organisation is very quick to respond and receive something and create an action plan and a report and a process, whereas thematically we've put in place over the last 12 or 18 months big programmes of change. So I'll be very surprised, unless it's anything technically specific by a service, that these themes aren't picked up within our recovery support work and the improvement programme. So just to draw the board's attention, we're putting in place a strengthened process for a repository for national reports and feedback, and then a way of working that dovetails to existing programmes, and where we think there are gaps, then we commit additional resource where we think we need to.
Thanks for those. I'm going to bring Karen in. I'm conscious of the time, colleagues, and then yourself. We've got 10 minutes, and Heather, that's 3 more papers to go through, and time for question and answers. So, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, thank you, Heather. Just really specifically wanted to highlight with the recommendation from East Kent around the significance of finding signals amongst noise, and how far the maternity dashboard and then the nursing dashboards that are also following on, how helpful they are in doing that. I've certainly seen that in action in the way that you've started to report, but a critical feature of those is that the data is clinically validated and accurate. And I know there are 1 or 2 issues still to resolve in that, and it was really a question to you, Heather, about whether that's all in hand or whether you would value any support from the board to make sure that they are as accurate as they can be.
I think the data accuracy now, Karen, is really quite good. The next step for us is being able to split it by site. That's the piece, the next piece that's missing, because that's really important as well, because data can be misconstrued when it's all lumped together. So the next stage for us is splitting it by site and making sure that that's accurate.
Brilliant. And do you have a time frame for that? I totally agree that will really support and enable improvement. Do you have a time frame for that, or do you need any support from us to progress that?
No, I think we've had a bit of delay through I3, but if we need any further escalation, then we'll come to Safety Champions to discuss what support we may need.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
For minuting, Chair, comments committee considered this whole suite of papers, and I will comment if I need to individual. The only point I want to make here is to reiterate the Chair's point. I think it's really interesting that Kirkup has actually majored on 4 themes here rather than coming out with hundreds and hundreds of recommendations. I'm just going to read those 4 headings again because I think they're so important. Monitoring safe performance by finding signals amongst the noise. Jill particularly has been challenging us about how we do that, and I think we are getting better. That's a really important theme. Clinical behaviour, technical care is not enough. And flawed teamwork, pulling in different directions. I think we've already heard enough already at this board about the challenges that gives us when that happens, and organisational behaviour, looking good while doing badly as an organisation. And I think those 4 themes, when I read the report and read the summary, just hit me between the eyes that we should take those themes into our overall thinking about going forward and how we work proactively to become a great trust, really.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious we're eating into Heather's time here. Thanks for those points, and we acknowledge and know you that you've looked at this in detail in quality as well. So I don't want to replicate or repeat any issues that you've raised in the subcommittee. So I'm going to ask colleagues, do we note that report? Yeah. Heather, we're moving on then to the perinatal mortality review. I know you have alluded to these other papers in your overall presentation then, so just bring us to the main points.
Yeah. So the PMRT report is a report into a PMRT review that was undertaken following a request from NHS England, which was following an external review. This was following NHS England's review of the PMRT cases that were uploaded into an Ockendon portal. And they advised that we undertook a review into the grading of care and the involvement of families within the PMRT process. So an external review was commissioned and undertaken throughout July and August this year, where we examined 30 PMRT cases in terms of the grading of harm and involvement of families. Now, obviously, this PMRT report has been to private board before, but this paper is had all patient identifiable information removed, so it can be presented to public board today. So at the time of the external review, we had 30 cases to review. We could only review 29 at the time because one set of case notes was unavailable. But what the external review found was that there were some gaps in our PMRT process and how we engage families within that process. We found that 22 sets of parents who had been informed of their PMRT and 6 parents had received feedback on their PMRT reports. And obviously, taking the report as read, we found clear evidence of compassionate bereavement support and care of the families. But the PMRT process is separate to that. It's a process about a perinatal mortality review and families having the opportunity to be engaged in the process and discuss any concerns they've got about their care or any questions they've got. What was found out of the review that alongside the compassionate bereavement support and care, there was follow-up with appropriate consultants and team members. But the actual PMRT process, what we found, there was issues around when it wasn't MDT focused, and the fact that a lot of the families hadn't been actively offered engagement throughout that process. Following the external review, it's recommended that out of the 29 cases, 4 of the PMRT cases that were involved were to have their grading of care reclassified from an A rating to a C rating. Now, what that means is that there were some concerns highlighted with their care that may have resulted in a different outcome for the baby. So, the report. So following the report, those 4 cases have been raised as serious incidents, and we're now working closely with those families in terms of the PMRT process, but also the serious incident process. And due to the failure of the PMRT process, we've also raised a further SI for that to be explored in more detail of how the process went wrong. So for all the families involved in the external review, they've been offered specialist bereavement counselling, which has been received very well by the families. They've all had personal communication followed up by letters. The staff that have been involved in the cases, particularly the cases around where the care has been upgraded, have been offered ongoing support. Currently, 25 of the 26 families have been contacted, and we're actively working with them together to get their PMRT reports inclusive of their questions and involvement So currently, the current position is 12 out of the 26 PMRT cases have been completed with the families. And there's an estimated completion date by the end of December for the remaining cases. However, we must appreciate that that timescale might have some movement due to the fact that we'll be very much guided by the families in terms of how much involvement they want, at what pace, and their availability for meetings with clinicians, etc. So I think for me that the main issue to highlight is, again, recognising what Phil said around the importance of working with families, particularly those families where the outcomes have been adverse. And we recognise that, you know, this is a theme within maternity services. We must get better at working with families. And that's not just Morecambe Bay, that is a national issue. So we've really got to start putting patients at the heart of everything we do with everything. So we know that PMRT nationally has been a problem. There's a report that's published every year around the national position of PMRT. So we're not unique in some of the challenges we've had around PMRT, but certainly we're working really, really hard to make sure that our family engagement is the best it can be moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Colleagues, again, the recommendation is that this is further assurances through the Quality Committee. Hugh's already said that they're looking at this anyway. So I'm going to ask colleagues, is there anything that's related to the actual board scrutiny of this out with what our subcommittee is doing?
Just to recognise, board, as Heather said, we considered this in private board in some detail. It's here because we wanted to make sure that it was visible, and obviously we've anonymised the record. So I appreciate why there might not be many questions here because we've gone through it in some detail at board previously.
Okay, colleagues, we accept the recommendation. Oh, Bridget.
And just for further assurance, in terms of the monitoring, it's been done through the Quality Committee to ensure that the processes that we have in place are at the standard of PMRT, and there's monitoring arrangements that's been done through the Quality Assurance Committee.
Okay. I think the key words is sustainable delivery and pace. Sarah?
And I was just going to add to that, I really welcome the fact that in addition to the fact we've raised 4 serious incidents relating to the cases, and of course that's families, actually there's an additional one raised to say this went wrong and we need to learn from it and do it differently. So I think in terms of providing some assurance that we're learning from that and moving forward, that's very helpful. So we'll look forward to understanding the outcome from that.
Okay, accept the recommendation. Okay, ridiculous though it sounds, Heather, you've got 60 seconds to do the next item. Really not.
So clearly what I'm going to touch on is there's 4 papers attached for CNST. So there's one for anaesthetic medical workforce, that's CNST standard 4. You'll see in the paper that is compliant with the standard. There's a midwifery workforce paper, that's CNST safety standard 5, that is currently non-compliant. Neonatal medical and nursing workforce, which is CNST standard safety action 4, is non-compliant. The 4th paper is maternity voices partnership, which is safety standard 7, and that is currently compliant. I think for me, Chair, it's just to note that the CNST evidence and board sign off is for next month. So I'm happy to just take any questions if anybody's got anything specific about the papers that I'll take as read.
Okay, thank you. And that includes 1623 and 1624, because you just mentioned safety action 7. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Colleagues? Questions or comments?
Again, Chair, we looked at these in details, and there are a number of actions that are going to be brought back, assurances around some of the workforce issues that were not non-compliant.
Yeah.
Okay, we accept those recommendations then. See the report. Heather, thank you. And I know we passed each other in the corridor yesterday. Next time, stop. We'll have a cup of tea and a catch up. It was good to see you yesterday.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, it's 1 minute past 11, 10-minute break.
The bit that I don't get.
Can I ask you a question?